Well, let me say selfishly, if it's just from a fan's perspective, I wouldn't do anything because Florida, along with California, now have an advantage, right? And that is beginning at the end of June of next year. And if an athlete comes to the University of Miami or comes to Central Florida or comes to the University of Florida or FSU or South Florida, what have you, they're going to be able to make some money on their name, image, and likeness, and that. Even if it's not a booster not doing it, but just the fact that that's in place is going to be a recruiting advantage. The problem we have is college football, particularly the monetized sports, right? College football, basketball, the guys with the TV contracts. These sports are not going to be able to survive long term if you have 50 different states and recruiting becomes impacted by this. So we need to have a national standard. I don't think Congress should write the national standard, frankly. I think the NCAA needs to. And so what the bill does is it basically says the NCAA has until the end of June of next year to come up with what that standard looks like. And it puts some fences around it. You know, they have to allow them to have professional representation, again, subject to the laws that regulate agents and so forth. They have to require disclosures so that to both the university and the NCAA, so we know who's compensating players and so forth. It has to preserve their amateur status. It has to have appropriate measures in place to make sure that it's not part of recruiting or that boosters are not getting involved in this at the front end, going after high school athletes. But other than that, it's up to them to design it. If they do not design it by June 30th, then the Federal Trade Commission is empowered to authorize rules under the Unfair Deceptive Practices Statute. So, that is, but it would preempt the state laws. So now you would have a national standard across the board for all 50 states as opposed to this patchwork, which I think would be, devastating. I just say this to people. The debate about whether or not athletes who are amateurs should be able to earn compensation for their name, their image, and their likeness. That's no longer the issue. That's happening. Two big states, two of the three largest states in the country have now passed a law allowing that. The only issue now that remains is, are we going to have 50 different laws out there about how it's regulated, or are we going to have a uniform and even playing field? And if we don't have a uniform and even playing field, I think it will severely damage college athletics up and down to all the sports, including the ones that may not generate a lot of revenue, but depend on the revenue from the other sports.
What are you hearing from Democrats, Republicans? Does this seem to be a partisan issue, or is it one that many different Democrats and Republicans agree with you on?
Well, I don't think it falls along partisan lines. I do think it falls along a couple lines. The first is there are people that still believe college athletes should not earn any compensation for their name, image, and likeness, or that they're amateurs, that they're getting a scholarship, and that's benefit enough. And my argument to them is that debate is over. Once these states started passing these laws, that's not the issue any longer. And unless they want to pass a bill that bans that, which I don't think would pass. So then the second question is, if that debate is no longer going on, what should it look like? And then I think you get into areas where some, want to encourage the ability of student athletes to organize with unions and so forth. With that I don't believe that is what the scope of our legislation should be about. It should basically be something that sort of strongly encourages, put it to you that way, the NCAA to put in place these rules that they know they have to put in place. What we don't want to see is a 5-year delay, a 3-year delay, the sort of put off on the back burner kind of deal. So, I think it falls along those two lines, but there are some that are still resistant to the idea of college athletes being compensated. But I think that argument is no longer relevant because states are already making that decision.